Hi there, I'm Olivia Morgan, and let me tell you, nothing prepares you for lying in a hospital bed, fighting for your life, only to receive a text message that your parents have handed over your family's legacy to your younger sister. 15 years of dedication to our family's lakeside resort business, gone with a single announcement at what was supposed to be my welcome home celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It wasn't just a business, it was my entire future, the late nights earning my hospitality management degree, the international internships I took to bring fresh ideas back home, the relationships I sacrificed because the resort always came first. But the most devastating part? They didn't just take my future, they tried to erase my contributions entirely. You think that's bad? Wait until you hear how far they went before I finally showed them exactly who they were dealing with. The evening carried that particular kind of mountain chill, the type that seeps into your bones despite the warm May temperatures. I stood at the entrance of my parents' sprawling Aspen-style mansion in Lakeview, their prized Colorado estate with its panoramic views of the mountains and Silver Lake glistening in the distance. Everything looked perfect. The catered food, the string lights, the champagne glasses sparkling in the early evening glow. Too perfect to be real. My name is Olivia Morgan. I'm 34 years old, and tonight was supposed to be my celebration. After months battling an aggressive autoimmune condition that had left me hospitalized and fighting for my life, this was meant to be my welcome home party. More importantly, it was meant to be the official handover of Morgan Pines Resort and Spa, our family's award-winning mountain retreat that my grandfather had built from a single rustic lodge 50 years ago. For years, my parents had told me it would be mine to lead. "You're the one with the vision," my father would say. "When the time comes, you'll take Morgan Pines to places we never imagined." I believed him. I shaped my entire existence around that promise. All week, my mother had been sending those classic Eleanor Morgan messages, the kind dripping with maternal concern but laced with subtle control. "Don't overexert yourself tomorrow, Olivia. Remember to take your medications before coming. Your sister has been such a rock while you were ill." Each text felt like another pebble added to the weight already pressing on my chest. I almost didn't come tonight. Almost. The celebration was in full swing as I entered. Staff circulated with trays of local wines. Relatives I barely saw outside of holidays offered sympathetic smiles and comments about how much better I looked. My father, Richard, stood near the stone fireplace, commanding attention as always. His silver hair and tailored suit projected success and confidence, the image of the self-made tourism magnate he'd cultivated so carefully. And there, beside him, was Melissa, my younger sister, dressed in a designer dress I recognized from the latest collection I'd bookmarked before my illness, something I couldn't afford on my special projects director salary at the family business. She smiled like Colorado royalty while I stood in a dress I'd worn to events before, now hanging loosely on my still recovering frame. I forced a smile back, the kind that never quite reaches your eyes. Inside, I was unraveling. Mother spotted me from across the room. She glided over, wine glass in hand, her voice dripping with that particular brand of false warmth she'd perfected over decades of playing the perfect resort owner's wife. "Olivia, darling, I was worried you wouldn't feel up to coming." Her eyes flicked over my appearance with the briefest hint of disappointment. "You look better." "Wouldn't miss my own celebration," I said flatly. She leaned in, voice low but sharp, like the icicles that hung from our resort's eaves in winter. "You always make things difficult. Can't you just be happy tonight? This is about family." Family. That word was their weapon of choice. I nodded politely, excusing myself as she disappeared back into the crowd. Every step I took across that polished hardwood floor felt heavier, like I was walking toward something inevitable. as I made small talk with distant cousins and business connections my father had invited. I caught Melissa's glance more than once, a smile playing on her lips that seemed to know something I didn't. I should have seen it coming. An hour into the evening, the music softened, and my father tapped his wine glass with a silver spoon. The crowd fell quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice warm and practiced from years of welcoming guests, "to our resort. Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate with the Morgan family. As many of you know, this gathering has special significance. Not only are we welcoming our beloved Olivia home after her health struggles, but tonight marks a new chapter for Morgan Pines." He paused, his smile widening as he looked around the room. Family businesses are special. They're about legacy, about passing down not just assets, but values, tradition, and vision to the next generation. I glanced toward Janet, our resort's financial director, who stood near the windows already frowning slightly. My stomach tightened. Richard continued, raising his glass. "Tonight marks a new chapter for Morgan Pines. After careful consideration about the future of our business, and especially in light of Olivia's health concerns, Eleanor and I have made an important decision." The room seemed to hold its breath. Or maybe it was just me, suddenly unable to draw air into my lungs. "We're officially announcing that Melissa will be taking over as CEO of Morgan Pines Resort and Spa, effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. Someone whistled. Glasses clinked in celebration. I stood frozen, blood draining from my face, as my father continued. "Melissa's fresh perspective and innovative ideas are exactly what we need to take our resort into the modern era." I glanced at my sister, who gave me a practiced look of surprise that didn't quite mask her satisfaction. My mother stepped up beside her, hand on her arm, beaming with pride. "It's what's best for the family business," Eleanor whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Your health comes first, darling. You'll understand one day." I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up, the practiced words of protest dying before they could form. The room blurred around me. Guests clapping, nodding, smiling, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Like I wasn't standing there hollowed out, watching my future handed away like a party favor. Years of education specifically chosen for this role. Countless hours developing our ecotourism programs. Marketing initiatives I'd researched and implemented that had doubled our bookings in the off-season, all erased in that moment. When the applause faded, conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. My parents beamed. Melissa accepted congratulations with practiced humility. And I stood there, invisible in the crowd of my own celebration turned nightmare. Across the room, Janet caught my gaze and subtly shook her head as if to say, "Don't react now. They want a scene." I swallowed the lump in my throat, fists clenched at my sides. They thought this was over. They thought they'd humiliated me enough to keep me quiet and compliant. But if they thought I would stay silent after tonight, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The Morgan family was about to learn that some promises should never be broken, and some daughters should never be underestimated. The echo of congratulations and clinking glasses stayed with me long after I left my parents' mansion. The night air had cooled, but the heat simmering in, my chest burned hotter than ever. I drove home on autopilot, Colorado's winding mountain roads and dense pine forest blurring past me like streaks of regret. By the time I reached my small cabin on the edge of the resort property, the same cabin my grandfather had lived in when he first started the business, the weight of the night finally hit me. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The moonlight, filtering through the windows, was enough to remind me that even this space probably wouldn't be mine for much longer. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the door, and sat motionless on my couch, staring at the framed photograph on my wall. Me and Grandpa Thomas standing on the original lodge's porch, his weathered hand on my shoulder, pride evident in his eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You'll carry on what I started," he'd told me that day. "You have the Morgan vision." My phone buzzed relentlessly on the coffee table. Another text from my mother. "You really should have stayed longer tonight. It's about family, Olivia." Family. That word had been weaponized so many times in my life it had lost all meaning. I scrolled back through her earlier messages, the ones she'd sent in the days leading up to tonight. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Try not to embarrass us. Your sister deserves to shine too." The words blurred together, but the message was clear. Sit down, smile pretty, and let them take whatever they want. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the business plans I'd meticulously prepared over the years. The sustainable tourism initiative I'd developed, the expansion proposal for our wellness center, the marketing rebrand I'd researched for months. All of it was mine, the product of my education, my passion, my dedication to my grandfather's legacy. And yet tonight, they decided it wasn't. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I finally dragged myself to bed, but sleep never came. Instead, I lay awake, replaying every conversation, every promise my parents had made, every knowing glance between them and Melissa. By morning, exhaustion hadn't left me. It had simply calcified into something sharper: resolve. At exactly 7:36 a.m., an email notification flashed across my phone screen. Subject: Need to speak with you, urgent. Sender: Janet Reynolds. A tight knot formed in my stomach. I got ready, pulling my hair back into a neat ponytail, and drove to the resort office. The morning fog still clung to the pines, shrouding the mountains in a ghostly white blanket. The Morgan Pines Resort sign at the entrance, hand-carved by my grandfather 50 years ago, seemed to mock me as I drove past. The administrative building was quiet this early, most of the staff not due in for another hour. Janet was already waiting in her office when I arrived, standing by the window overlooking the east side of the property, arms folded, a manila folder resting on the edge of her desk. "You look terrible," she said without looking at me. "Good morning to you too," I muttered, shutting the door behind me. She finally met my eyes. "You need to see this." She slid the folder across the desk. I flipped it open, and the numbers stared back at me. Cold, indisputable, unauthorized transfers, unexplained expenditures. Thousands upon thousands in marketing expenses that didn't match any campaigns we'd actually run. Janet's voice was low but precise. "I ran a preliminary audit. This is just from the last fiscal year. Over $250,000 in personal expenses, all funneled through the resort's accounts." I flipped through the pages. Designer clothing purchases, a European vacation, a new luxury car, spa retreats, all disguised as business expenses and resort improvements, all tied to Melissa's name. "Are you kidding me?" I whispered, anger rising in my throat. "It's systematic," Janet said quietly. "She's been draining resort funds for years. And guess who approved most of these expenses?" I didn't need to ask. My father's signature was stamped across nearly every page. I leaned back in the chair, heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about the CEO position anymore. It never was. "This isn't negligence," I said finally. "This is theft." Janet nodded once. "You need to decide." "Decide what?" "How far you're willing to go." I sat in silence, flipping through each damning page. 3 years' worth of betrayal staring back at me in black and white. The irony wasn't lost on me. How they'd stood in front of friends and family last night preaching about legacy and tradition while bleeding the resort dry behind closed doors. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers tightening around its edge. "They made this personal," I said, voice calm but cold. "So I'm going to make it professional." I glanced up at Janet. "Get me everything you can. Every transaction, every signature. We're not letting this go. Her eyes narrowed slightly, then she gave a small nod. Understood. As she left the room, I looked out the window at the resort stretching toward the distant blue mountains. The same view my grandfather had loved. The same land he had trusted my father to protect. The same legacy they were destroying. If they thought this was over, they were about to learn how wrong they were. A week crawled by after Janet's discovery, each day heavier than the last. I went through the motions, meeting with vendors, reviewing marketing materials, conducting staff training sessions. While inside, something sharp twisted deeper every hour. I maintained a careful facade. I nodded politely when I passed my sister in the lobby. I answered my mother's texts with brief, non-committal replies. I attended the weekly management meeting where Melissa presented her vision for the resort's future. A vision that involved selling off our sustainable nature trails to make room for luxury shopping and experiential retail packages. All the while, Janet and I worked silently, methodically, gathering evidence, building our case, preparing for the moment when everything would change. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the knock came at my cabin door. Soft, hesitant, like bad news dressed up in perfume. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there she stood, Olivia Morgan, the woman who gave me life and spent most of it molding me into what she wanted, only to cast me aside when it mattered most. "Hi, sweetheart," she said sweetly, as if she hadn't publicly humiliated me just days ago. The polite smile on her lips didn't reach her eyes. That's how I knew this wasn't a social visit. I stepped aside without a word, letting her in. She moved with practiced grace, heels clicking against my hardwood floors like a ticking clock. Eleanor didn't waste time. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it onto my kitchen counter. "It's just a formality," she said lightly, almost breezy. "Something the lawyers need you to sign." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" She tilted her head, voice syrup sweet. "Nothing to worry about, darling. Just housekeeping. You know how these succession things are." My stomach sank. When my mother played sweet, it meant she had a knife behind her back. I opened the folder. My eyes skimmed the header first. Release of management interest and future claims. And then, in clean, cold legal language, the content spelled it out. I was being asked to formally renounce any current or future claim to leadership positions within Morgan Pines Resort and Spa, acknowledge Melissa's appointment as appropriate and final, and waive any right to contest company decisions. My name was there at the bottom, a signature line waiting for me, as if this betrayal needed my permission to be complete. I looked up slowly. "This is why you came here?" My voice felt like broken glass in my throat. Eleanor's smile didn't falter. "You know how these things work, Olivia. It's better for the resort's image if there's unified family support. Melissa will represent the brand better with her social connections and fresh approach." She reached out, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "I know you don't like surprises, but this is what's best for all of us." "All of us?" I swallowed the bitter taste rising in my mouth. "Do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to sign away my future?" Eleanor's face softened into mock concern. "It's just paperwork, sweetheart. You'll still have your role in operations. You'll understand one day when you have your own family." Her words landed like a slap. Something cracked inside me then. Not a break, but a clean, sharp snap of realization. I set the folder back on the counter without looking at it. "You know," I said, voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest, "I used to believe you when you said family takes care of its own." "Well, of course," her smile twitched. "But it's always been me, hasn't it?" I cut in. "I gave up everything, my time, my weekends, relationships, opportunities abroad, so Melissa could party through college while you two pretended we were this perfect family business." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, the sweetness evaporating. "This isn't about you, Olivia," she said coldly. "It's about what's best for Morgan Pines." There it was, the real voice behind the smile. I took a breath, gathering every ounce of the steel I'd spent years building. "No," I said firmly. "It's about control. And I'm done handing mine over." "Think carefully, Olivia. Family comes first." I met her gaze head-on. "Not when family treats you like you're disposable." The silence between us was louder than any argument. Eleanor stood there a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she slipped her handbag back over her shoulder and walked to the door. I didn't move until I heard it click shut behind her. Only then did I lean against the counter, my chest tight, hands trembling not from fear but from the weight of every unspoken battle finally coming to the surface. They thought they could push me to my breaking point. They didn't know how far I was willing to go. The door had barely closed behind my mother when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I spent the rest of that evening doing what I'd trained myself to do over years at the resort, methodically planning, organizing, preparing. I pulled out my laptop and began documenting everything. Every promise made about my future role, every conversation about succession planning, every unusual expense I'd noticed over the years. I organized the information Janet had given me, creating a timeline of financial misconduct. For days after, I kept my head down at the resort, making sure no one could see the storm brewing beneath my skin. My parents wanted me out of the picture quietly, and I knew better than to give them a reason to accelerate their plans. But I didn't have to wait long. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I was at my desk in the operations office reviewing, booking projections when my inbox pinged with a new message. Subject: Morgan Pines restructuring, effective immediately. The sender wasn't Janet. It wasn't even our HR manager. It was my father. The blood drained from my face before I even clicked to open it. When I did, the words punched me in the stomach. Proposal effective immediately. Morgan Pines recommends a restructuring of operations leadership. Olivia Morgan to step down as head of operations and assume the role of assistant events coordinator. Melissa Morgan to appoint a new head of operations of her choosing. Beneath it, an additional note in my father's handwriting, scanned and attached. Olivia has become increasingly resistant to innovation and unable to adapt to market changes. For the good of the resort and the family's image, a leadership shift in operations is necessary. I couldn't breathe. The very man who had taught me everything I knew about the hospitality industry, who had once proudly introduced me to business associates as the future of Morgan Pines, was now writing me off like a liability. Without thinking, I picked up my phone and dialed Janet's number. She answered on the second ring. "I was about to call you," I said, my voice tight. "You saw it?" She sighed heavily. "And there's more. We need to talk." Within half an hour, we were sitting in her car, parked at the far edge of the property where the resort met the national forest. Janet handed me another folder. "I ran deeper checks," she said quietly, "because something about all this felt wrong." I flipped the folder open and scanned the documents inside. It didn't take long before the numbers jumped out at me. Resort assets, equipment purchases, a land parcel adjacent to our property, all mortgaged without board approval, a private loan. Attached to those mortgages, nearly $1 or $8 million. So, for what? I asked, throat dry. For Melissa, Janet replied grimly. A new venture in luxury retail. Your parents signed off on everything, and they forged your signature on the board documents to push it through. As head of operations, you should have been consulted. I leaned back in my seat, the weight of it all crashing down on me like an avalanche. It wasn't just my position. It wasn't just my demotion. They were dismantling everything my grandfather had built, risking our entire operation, and using my name to do it. I stared at the mortgage documents in my hands, my vision blurring around the edges. "They didn't just want to push me aside," I said quietly. "They're risking everything my grandfather built." Janet nodded grimly. "The resort's equity is being leveraged for some retail venture Melissa wants to launch, a luxury shopping arcade, or something. The business plan is flimsy at best." I flipped through page after page of financial maneuvering. Each signature, my forged signature, like a knife twisting deeper. "This isn't just about succession anymore," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is fraud." "I know." Janet looked out at the forest, rows of carefully preserved pines stretching toward the mountains. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I stared down at the documents, then at my grandfather's cabin visible through the trees. I thought about him, how he'd worked this land with his own hands, how he'd built something from nothing, how he'd trusted that I would be the one to carry it forward. "I'm going to fight," I said simply, "not just for my position, but for the resort itself." But there was one more card I hadn't yet revealed, not even to Janet. One that would change everything. During my illness, while lying in that hospital bed facing my own mortality, I'd made a decision. I'd liquidated my personal investments, taken my inheritance from my grandfather's personal estate, and with the help of my childhood friend Alex, now a successful real estate agent, I'd made a purchase. A purchase I'd kept secret from everyone. I'd bought Silver Pines Manor, the historic Victorian mansion overlooking Silver Lake that my parents had coveted for 30 years. The property they'd tried to acquire multiple times for their retirement. Dream home, only to be rejected by the elderly owner who distrusted my father's intentions for the historic property. In a twist of fate, the owner had passed away during my hospitalization, and his children had quietly listed the property. Alex had alerted me immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my parents were planning to strip me of my future, I had secretly acquired their dream. I hadn't decided what to do with the property yet. But now, as I held evidence of their betrayal in my hands, I realized it might be exactly the leverage I needed. I spent the next several hours in Janet's office, gathering everything: emails, financial statements, internal memos, the paper trail they thought I'd never find. Every signature, every unauthorized transfer, every cent funneled where it shouldn't have been. By the time I finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the resort. I sat at my desk, staring at the mountain of evidence, the sickening reality of what my own family had done. Then I opened a new email to our board of directors, most of whom were old friends of my grandfather, people who had watched me grow up among these pines. Subject: emergency board meeting request, financial irregularities and executive misconduct. My fingers hovered over the keyboard one last moment before I hit send. They thought they had silenced me. I was about to prove them wrong. I spent the next several hours in Janet's office, gathering everything: emails, financial statements, internal memos, the paper trail they thought I'd never find, every signature, every unauthorized transfer, every cent funneled where it shouldn't have been. By the time I finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the resort. I sat at my desk, staring at the mountain of evidence, the sickening reality of what my own family had done. Then I opened a new email to our board of directors, most of whom were old friends of my grandfather, people who had watched me grow up among these pines. Subject: emergency board meeting request, financial irregularities and executive misconduct. My fingers hovered over the keyboard one last moment before I hit send. They thought they had silenced me. I was about to prove them wrong. The email to the board had barely left my outbox when I turned my focus to the next battlefront. I wasn't naive enough to believe the documents alone would be enough. I needed every loose thread tied, every name revealed. By Tuesday morning, I was back at my desk in the operations office, scanning through the demotion notice more carefully. Something caught my eye. Specific legal phrasing about succession planning that seemed oddly formal, too polished for my father's usual communication style. I recognized it because I'd seen similar language before in contracts drafted by Martin Coleman, our family's longtime attorney and my father's college friend. The same man who had helped my grandfather set up the original succession plan, the one that was supposed to make me CEO. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Martin had known. He'd helped them rewrite everything. By late afternoon, I couldn't shake the suspicion. I drove to Martin's office in downtown Lakeview, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. His assistant tried to stop me, but I walked past her desk with purpose. Martin looked up, startled when I pushed open his office door without knocking. "Olivia, what a surprise." His smile faltered at the edges. I closed the door behind me and dropped the succession documents on his desk. "Let's skip the small talk," I said quietly. "You drafted this." Martin glanced at the papers, his expression carefully neutral. "I oversee all corporate documents for Morgan Pines. This isn't just any document," I replied, my voice leveled despite the anger burning in my chest. "This is the rewrite of my grandfather's succession plan, the one you helped him create, the one that named me as his successor." For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Discomfort, maybe even guilt. But it vanished quickly. "Business? Succession is complex, Olivia," he said evenly. "Your parents made a business decision about what was best for the resort's future." "Don't." My voice was sharp now. "Don't pretend this was just business. You helped them forge my signature on loan documents. You helped them mortgage resort assets without board approval." His face paled slightly. He hadn't expected me to know that. "Your parents asked me to secure the resort's future," he said carefully. "Melissa's retail concept will diversify." "You knew my grandfather's wishes," I cut in. "You were there when he made them clear. You were his friend." Martin leaned back in his chair, something like pity crossing his face. "Thomas is gone. Olivia, the business moves forward. Your parents are the majority shareholders now." I stood there for a long moment, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. Finally, I spoke, my voice quiet but firm. "You made your choice, Martin. So, will I..." I walked out without another word, the click of the door behind me sounding final. That night, back in my cabin, I sat at my grandfather's old oak desk, the one where he'd taught me how to read profit and loss statements when I was just 12. The lights were dim, the resort outside my window a dark silhouette against the night sky. I opened my laptop and typed the words I never thought I'd send to my own family. To Richard Morgan, Eleanor Morgan, Melissa Morgan. Subject: Final notice. Any further attempt to misappropriate resort assets or remove me from my position will be met with full legal consequences. You've crossed every line. There won't be a next. Time. I read the words twice before clicking send. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was something colder, sharper. A line I knew I would never uncross. Later that night, Janet arrived at my cabin, still in her work clothes, her sleeves rolled up like she'd barely stopped working. "You sure about this?" she asked as she sat across from me at my kitchen table. I nodded, sliding a thick folder toward her. "They've made it clear this isn't about family. It's about power and money." We went over every document, every name, every move. This wasn't going to be pretty. Exposing my family's financial misconduct would inevitably damage the resort's reputation, the very thing my grandfather had spent his life building. But letting them continue would destroy it completely. "The board meeting is scheduled for Friday," Janet said, checking her phone. "Your father's trying to get it postponed." "Of course he is." I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "He knows what's coming." Janet studied me for a moment. "You know there's no going back from this, right? Once, You present this to the board. I know. I looked out at the dark silhouettes of the pines my grandfather had preserved. But there's no going back anyway. They made sure of that. What my family didn't realize was that I had stopped playing by their rules. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore, willing to step aside for the good of family harmony. I was my grandfather's granddaughter, stubborn, principled, and ready to fight for what was mine. It didn't take long after I sent the warning email for them to make their next move. Mid-May mornings in Colorado had a certain crispness to the air, the resort alive with early summer tourists. But that Monday, the chill I felt wasn't from the weather. It came from an email forwarded to me by one of our junior marketing associates. Subject line: Morgan Pines rebranding launch and exclusive preview event. The invitation was sleek and expensive, dripping with curated elegance. A rebranding event, they called it. But the guest list told another story. Social media influencers, lifestyle bloggers, luxury retail executives, and Denver socialites with no connection to the hospitality industry. And the signature at the bottom, hosted by Olivia Morgan, CEO of Morgan Pines Resort and Spa and founder of Altitude Luxe. My fingers curled around the mouse as I scrolled through the details. The date was tomorrow night. The venue was our newly renovated Mountain Lodge, a project I had overseen from concept to completion. The budget was staggering. $180,000 approved under marketing and brand development. I barely had time to process when Janet burst into my office, holding a stack of papers. "You've seen it?" she asked, shutting the door behind her. I nodded. "Just now." She dropped the expense breakdown on my desk. "Take a look. This isn't a rebranding event. It's a launch party for Melissa's retail project. No hospitality industry connections, no travel writers, no tourism partners. It's all about promoting her side venture using resort resources." I flipped through the pages. Celebrity chef catering, designer floral installations, gift bags containing luxury fashion samples. None of it related to our resort experience. A photographer and videographer contracted to shoot material for Altitude Luxe promotional assets. "This is theft dressed up as marketing," I muttered. Janet crossed her arms, jaw tight. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They think you're already out." I looked up at her, something icy settling behind my eyes. Well, they're about to find out otherwise. That night, I sat in my cabin watching Instagram stories flood in from Melissa's private account, previews of the event setup, close-ups of the expensive floral arrangements, behind-the-scenes glimpses of gift bag assembly. Every post was branded with both Morgan Pines and Altitude Luxe logos, as if they were already one and the same. I didn't sleep. Instead, I drafted a detailed memo to the board documenting how resort resources were being misappropriated for a DAO, separate business venture without proper authorization. I attached photos, budget numbers, vendor contracts, everything necessary to show this wasn't just poor judgment, but deliberate misuse of company assets. The whispers at the resort, next day told me everything I needed to know. Olivia's just jealous of Melissa's vision. Maybe it's time for new leadership. Olivia's stuck in the past. I heard every comment in the staff lounge, every conversation that stopped when I entered the dining hall, every smile too polite, every glance too sympathetic. By mid-morning, I'd had enough. I called Janet to my office. "Draft me an internal memo," I said. She looked wary. "You're sure this is the right timing? The board meeting is in 2 days. "I'm sure," I nodded. "This isn't reactionary, it's necessary." Together, we outlined every point. Effective immediately, all marketing expenditures exceeding $10,000 required dual approval from both operations and finance. All vendor contracts needed documentation of their direct benefit to resort services. Any events hosted at resort facilities must focus primarily on Morgan Pines guest experiences, with detailed justification for any peripheral activities. When I finished reviewing it, I added one final line. Morgan Pines resources exist to support our hospitality legacy, not personal side ventures or retail brands. The memo went out to every department head, every board member, and the entire executive team. The fallout was immediate. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Calls from confused employees, texts from my mother demanding an explanation, an email from my father insisting I retract the memo before causing irreparable damage. Melissa didn't call or text. Instead, she marched directly into my office an hour later, cheeks flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, waving her phone with the memo displayed. "The event is tonight." I looked up calmly from my computer. "I'm protecting the resort's assets. That's my job. This is sabotage, and you know it." Her voice shook slightly. "You're just upset because Dad chose me to lead." I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister. The designer clothes, the perfect manicure, the carefully cultivated image that had nothing to do with hospitality and everything to do with the lifestyle she wanted to project. "No, Melissa, I'm upset because you and our parents are bleeding this resort dry to fund your retail fantasy. Tonight's event has nothing to do with our guests and everything to do with launching your personal brand." She scoffed. "It's called synergy, Olivia. Something you wouldn't understand with your outdated ideas. The modern luxury traveler wants lifestyle experiences, not just hotel rooms. The modern luxury traveler also expects authenticity," I replied evenly. "Something that's hard to maintain when you're busy forging documents and misappropriating funds." Her face paled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." I stood, gathering a folder from my desk. "And so will the board at Friday's meeting." Something flickered in her eyes, a flash of uncertainty, maybe even fear. Then it hardened into cold determination. "You won't win this, Olivia," she said quietly. "Mom and Dad have already decided. The board trusts them. You're just making yourself look bitter and vindictive." I smiled slightly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "We'll see." After she left, Janet walked in, an eyebrow raised. That looked intense. "It was," I sighed, looking out at the resort, the late afternoon sun gilding the pine trees, "but necessary." "You know they'll still hold the event tonight, right? Your memo can't stop what's already been set in motion." I nodded. "I know. But now there's a paper trail showing I formally objected, and every board member will be watching. What happens tonight with new eyes?" That evening, I drove to a small overlook above the resort. I could see the twinkling lights in the mountain lodge, the steady stream of luxury cars pulling up to the entrance, camera flashes like fireflies in the gathering dusk. From this distance, it looked magical, like something from a glossy magazine, spread. No one seeing it would know about the forged signatures, the misappropriated funds, the betrayal that made it possible. I sat there alone, watching as my family's legacy was used as a backdrop for my sister's ambitions. They wanted to paint me as the villain, the jealous sister, the outdated traditionalist, the obstacle to progress. Fine, I'd be the villain. Because sometimes the monster isn't the one who starts the fight, it's the one who finishes it. The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the light filtering through the pine trees outside my window. It was the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on my nightstand. When I finally grabbed it, the screen lit up with missed calls, 27 in total. Board members, staff, local business connections, and a barrage of text messages. All variations of the same urgent tone. "Olivia, have you seen what's happening? Call me ASAP." Is this true about Morgan Pines? With a sinking feeling, I opened one of the links someone had sent. Headline: Family Feud Threatens Award Winning. Resort below it, a photo of Melissa and me from last year's summer gala, smiling stiffly side by side among the resort's guests. The article painted me as a jealous obstructionist, a bitter sibling who couldn't accept change or innovation. who was trying to sabotage my sister's vision for modernizing the family business. Every quote carefully framed to make me look unreasonable. Every fact selectively presented. I barely had time to process when Janet's name flashed on my screen. I answered immediately. "Tell me you're seeing this," I said without preamble. She let out a breath on the other end. "It's worse than you think. Melissa leaked internal emails to the press, selectively edited, of course. She's making you look like you're sabotaging the resort out of spite." My stomach clenched as I sat up, the blanket falling away. "How?" "Through Martin Coleman, most likely. They're feeding stories to the local business journal, the regional travel magazines, even the tourism blogs. The story is everywhere." My inbox confirmed it. Dozens of messages from industry contacts, some expressing concern, others distancing themselves already. Scrolling through social media was worse. Morgan Pines drama, resort family feud, sisterly rivalry. Every comment seemed to take Melissa's side. Innovation is necessary for survival. Some people just can't handle change. Classic case of jealousy. A text from my mother arrived next. "See what you've done to this family?" I stared at the screen, fingers numb. She wasn't upset about the lies. She was upset they weren't the only ones controlling the narrative anymore. By noon, the tension at the resort was suffocating. Staff members I'd worked alongside for years avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms, and front desk employees huddled in corners, whispering about job security and taking sides. It wasn't paranoia. This was exactly how my family operated when they felt threatened. Late that afternoon, I walked into the small conservation office where Ben Wallace, our environmental director, was reviewing trail maintenance reports. He'd been with the resort since my grandfather's time, had taught me how to identify the native plant species across our property. He barely looked up when I entered. "Got a minute?" I asked. Ben nodded stiffly, still focused on his paperwork. I closed the door behind me. "Let's not pretend," I said quietly. "I know you've been in meetings with Melissa." Ben sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "People are nervous, Olivia. The resort's reputation is taking hits. Staff don't know who to trust or what's coming next." I leaned against the counter. "Do you really believe I damaged the resort out of spite?" He hesitated, years of loyalty warring with current uncertainty. "I don't know what to believe anymore. But Melissa's promise of expansion, new markets, the retail venture bringing in wealthy clients, it's compelling. People are worried about job security. And my record of consistent quality, sustainable practices, and financial stability counts for nothing." His eyes softened slightly. "You know I respect what you've done here, but this battle between you two, it's tearing the place apart." That night in my cabin, Janet sat across from me, laptop open between us. "We have enough," she said quietly. "Everything's ready for tomorrow's board meeting." I nodded, feeling the weight of what was coming. "Once this goes public, there's no going back." "They made it public," she reminded me. "Now they'll face the consequences." I spent the next 2 hours organizing the final documents, financial records, audit reports, legal assessments, every forged signature and unauthorized transaction methodically cataloged and annotated. My arsenal for tomorrow's battle. As I worked, a notification popped up on my laptop. An email from my grandfather's old friend, Walter Hayes, now the most senior member of our board. "Olivia, whatever happens tomorrow, remember that your grandfather valued 3 things above all: quality, integrity, and stewardship. Don't let anyone tell you different. Walt." I sat back, something warm and solid settling in my chest. At least one person still remembered what Morgan Pines was supposed to stand for. But there was still one more move to make, one I'd been saving. I picked up my phone and called Alex, my childhood friend and the real estate agent who had helped me with my secret purchase. "Is everything ready?" I asked when he answered. "All set," he confirmed. "The papers are exactly as you requested. Do you want me there tomorrow?" I thought for a moment. "No, this needs to come from me alone." "You sure about this, Liv?" His voice carried the concern of someone who'd known me long enough to worry. "Once you play this card—" "I'm sure," I said firmly. They left me no choice. After we hung up, I went to my safe and removed a thick envelope. Inside were the deed and ownership papers for Silver Pines Manor, the historic Victorian mansion my parents had coveted for decades, the property that represented their retirement dreams, the house that was now, secretly, mine. I added these documents to my briefcase, placing them in a separate folder marked simply contingency. I hoped I wouldn't need them, but in war, you keep your strongest weapons in reserve until absolutely necessary. The boardroom had never felt so cold. It was late May, the morning bright and clear outside. The resort a tapestry of green pines and blooming wildflowers. But inside the cedar-paneled room in our main building, the air was frigid with tension. I arrived early, my files tucked under one arm, steps deliberately measured as I took my place at the long oak table, the same table where my grandfather had held board meetings for decades. The chairs slowly filled with board members, some avoiding my gaze, others watching me too carefully. Across from me sat my parents, Richard and Eleanor Morgan, their expressions carefully neutral, and beside them, Melissa, scrolling through her phone as if this were just another inconvenient meeting. I didn't speak until Walter Hayes called, the meeting to order, and the door clicked shut. "Let's begin," Walter said, his voice grave. "This emergency meeting was requested by Olivia Morgan regarding serious concerns about financial management and corporate governance." I stood, placing the first folder in front of me. "What you're about to see is not just about succession disputes or differing visions for the resort," I began, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "It's about breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of funds, and document forgery." I opened the folder and slid copies across the table. Audit reports, financial statements, copies of my forged signature, receipts, emails, mortgage agreements, all pointing to one inescapable conclusion. "For the past 3 years," I continued, "resort funds have been systematically redirected for unauthorized purposes. Personal, expenses disguised as marketing costs, resort assets mortgaged without proper approval, and my signature forged on multiple legal documents, all to finance an entirely separate business venture called Altitude Lux." A murmur rippled through the room as pages were flipped, brows furrowed in concern or confusion. My father leaned forward, voice tightly controlled. "This is ridiculous. We can handle any concerns about resource allocation internally. There's no need for this spectacle." I met his gaze, unflinching. "You didn't hesitate to humiliate me publicly. We'll resolve this publicly as well." My mother shook her head, eyes cold. "This is family, Olivia. You're destroying what your grandfather built." "No," I said evenly, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "You destroyed it the day you decided my dedication and expertise were worth less than Melissa's ambitions." Walter Hayes cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations, Olivia. Can you walk us through the evidence?" Of course. I remained standing, methodically presenting each document. "First, let me show you the pattern of misappropriation." I displayed financial records, showing how resort marketing funds had been diverted to develop Melissa's retail concept. Over $850,000 in resort resources have been channeled into Altitude Lux in the past 3 years. None of this was disclosed to the board. Board member Elizabeth Chen, a retired hospitality executive and my grandfather's friend, spoke up. "These expenditures weren't flagged in our quarterly reviews because they were deliberately miscategorized," I explained, showing the next set of documents. marketing expenses, facility improvements, staff training, all legitimate-sounding expenses that were actually financing Melissa's separate business. I moved to the next exhibit. More concerning are these loan documents. The family mortgaged our lakefront property, our most valuable asset, to secure additional funding for Altitude Luxe. I slid forward copies of the mortgage papers. You'll notice my signature on page 3, except I never signed this document. I was never even informed of this transaction. The room grew quieter as board members examined the evidence. Richard. Morgan shifted in his chair, his composure beginning to crack. "This is a gross mischaracterization," he insisted. "We were diversifying the business, creating synergy between hospitality and retail." "Then why forge my signature?" I asked. "Directly. Why not disclose these plans to the board? Why disguise these expenses in our financial reporting?" Melissa finally looked up from her phone, her voice cool and dismissive. "We knew you'd react exactly like this, clinging to outdated ideas about what the resort should be. Grandpa's vision was important, but markets change. Morgan Pines needs to evolve." "Don't you dare invoke his name," I said, my voice low but intense. "Grandpa built this resort on quality and integrity, not by stealing and lying." Eleanor Morgan's face flushed with anger. "That's enough, Olivia. This theatrical performance doesn't change the fact that Richard and I are majority shareholders. The board serves at our discretion." Walter Hayes sat forward, his weathered hands folded on the table. "Actually, Eleanor, that's not entirely accurate. Thomas's trust structure gives this board independent authority over certain matters, including financial oversight and response to potential misconduct." My mother's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected that. Walter continued, "I think we need to hear the rest of Olivia's evidence." For the next 40 minutes, I methodically presented everything. Emails showing my parents knew the transactions weren't authorized. Doctored reports presented to the board. Detailed accounting of how resort resources had been diverted. I finished by playing an audio recording, my grandfather's voice, thin but determined, from shortly before his death. "The resort goes to Olivia. She understands what I've built here. She'll honor it. Get it in writing, Walter." Walter's voice responded, "It's all arranged, Thomas. Olivia will lead Morgan Pines when the time comes. I promise you." Silence fell over the room. My father's face had gone pale. Melissa stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Elizabeth Chen broke the silence. "I believe we've seen enough to warrant a formal investigation. I move that we suspend current management decisions pending an independent audit." Walter nodded. "I second the motion." "This is ridiculous," my father sputtered. "You can't possibly—" "Actually, we can," said Walter quietly. "As trustees of Thomas Morgan's legacy, we not only can, we must." The vote was called. One by hands raised around the table. In favor of freezing all transactions related to Altitude Luxe. In favor of an independent financial audit. In favor of temporarily removing Melissa from the CEO position pending investigation results. Each vote felt like vindication, like a weight lifting from my shoulders. When the final hand went up, the room fell into stunned silence. My father looked somehow diminished, slumped in his chair. My mother's face was a mask of cold fury. Melissa pushed her chair back abruptly and stood. "This is a mistake," she hissed. "You'll regret this." She didn't wait for a response, just stormed out, leaving only the echo of her footsteps behind. My parents followed shortly after, my mother pausing just long enough to give me a look that could have cut glass. The boardroom emptied gradually. Walter stayed behind, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder as he passed. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly, and then he too was gone. I remained seated, staring at the scattered papers in front of me, the folder marked "Contingency" still unopened in my briefcase. I had won the battle without revealing my final card. The house remained my secret, for now. But the resort, and my family, would never be the same. 3 months passed after the board meeting. Summer descended on Lakeview, the resort buzzing. With peak season visitors, the world outside vibrant and alive. Morgan Pines itself had undergone its own period of awakening and restructuring. The full audit had revealed even more extensive financial misconduct than I had initially discovered. The board had voted unanimously to reinstate me as director of operations, while a search committee formed to determine permanent executive leadership. Janet had been promoted to chief financial officer to ensure financial oversight remained stringent. Melissa had left Colorado entirely. Last I heard, she'd moved to California, attempting to launch a scaled-down version of her retail concept with investors who knew nothing of what had happened here. My parents had retreated to their winter home in Arizona despite the summer season. Communication between us reduced to formal emails regarding their shareholder status. The family law firm had negotiated a settlement that allowed them to maintain their ownership shares but removed them from operational decisions. The resort had survived, but the family had fractured in ways that might never heal. It was a warm June morning when I stood in the center of the newly renovated mountain lodge, the space Melissa had used for her launch party now restored to its original purpose as our premium guest experience center. The renovation was complete, erasing the last physical traces of the conflict that had torn through this place. I ran my hand along the cool pine beams, feeling the solidity that created the perfect environment for the mountain getaway experience our guests came for. This was what my grandfather had built. Not a glamorous backdrop for retail merchandise, but a place dedicated to the patient craft of hospitality. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I turned to see Walter approaching, dressed casually, in the resort's staff polo, a clipboard in hand. "It's looking good in here," he said, glancing around appreciatively. "Thomas would approve." I nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in my throat whenever my grandfather was mentioned. "I hope so." Walter studied me for a moment. "You know, he expected this would happen someday." "What do you mean?" The conflict, the attempt to push you aside." Walter sighed, tucking the clipboard under his arm. "Your parents never really understood what this place was about. Even when Thomas was alive, they saw it as a status symbol, not a calling. I hadn't known that. I'd always assumed the divide had formed after my grandfather's death. Why didn't he tell me?" Walter smiled sadly. "He wanted to protect you, and he believed in you. Believed you'd fight when the time came." We stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the mountain views visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, vistas that would draw guests long after this painful chapter had faded into memory. "What happens now?" I asked finally. Walter looked at me, his eyes kind but clear. "Now you build something that's truly yours. Not just preserving what Thomas created, but making your own mark." As I walked back to my office, my phone buzzed with a notification. An email from Alex, my childhood friend and real estate agent who had helped me purchase Silver Pines Manor, the Victorian mansion my parents had coveted for decades. "Silver Pines inspection complete. Renovations can begin whenever you're ready. What's the plan?" I paused, looking out the window toward the distant shoreline of the lake where the historic property stood, invisible from this angle but always present in my mind. I had purchased it during my illness, using my personal savings and my grandfather's private inheritance to me, funds separate from the resort business. At the time, it had been an impulse, a way to secure something beautiful while facing my mortality. Now, it represented something else entirely. A card I still hadn't played, a secret I continued to keep, even after the board meeting resolution. Did I really need to reveal it? The resort was mine again, in spirit, if not in title. The board trusted me. The staff had rallied around new leadership, but my parents still maintained their distance, their anger, their belief that I had somehow wronged them by fighting for what was mine. The breach felt permanent. I typed a quick reply to Alex. "Hold on renovations for now. I'll let you know the plans soon." 3 more weeks passed, summer in full bloom across the Colorado mountains. The resort operations had stabilized under my oversight, but personal wounds remained raw. The search committee was nearing a decision on executive leadership, with strong indications they would offer me the CEO position formally, despite my parents' continued objections from afar. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was Janet, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your parents are back in town. They're requesting a meeting with you and the board." My stomach tightened. What for? They wouldn't say exactly, but there are rumors they're considering selling their shares. The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, I had never imagined they would abandon the resort entirely. The legacy my grandfather had built, the business that had defined our family for generations. "To whom?" I managed to ask. "Horizon Hospitality Group, the corporate chain that's been buying up independent properties throughout the Rockies." I knew Horizon well. They specialized in acquiring unique properties, stripping them of their character, and turning them into standardized resort experiences with maximized profit margins and minimized local connection. Everything my grandfather had fought against. "When's the meeting?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. After hanging up, I stood at my office window, watching guests stroll along the pathways between pine trees, families laughing on their way to the lake, couples holding hands as they headed toward hiking trails. What would happen to this place under corporate ownership? What would become of the staff who had stood by me, the local partnerships we'd cultivated, the environmental commitments we'd made? I thought about Silver Pines Manor, still sitting empty on its lakefront perch, still my secret. And suddenly, I knew what I needed to do with it. I picked up my phone and called Alex. "I need the keys to Silver Pines, and I need you to prepare some paperwork. Tonight." The next morning arrived with a particular kind of clarity, the crisp mountain air carrying the scent of pine and possibility. I dressed with care, choosing a tailored blue suit my grandfather had always liked, his old wooden tie clip securing my silk tie. In my briefcase were 2 folders. The first contained a detailed 5-year plan for Morgan Pines, sustainability initiatives, updated guest experiences, staff development programs, the culmination of my vision for the resort's future. The second held the deed to Silver Pines Manor, the ownership transfer documents, and architectural plans I'd spent the night preparing. The boardroom was already full when I arrived, the board members seated along one side, Janet and Walter at the head of the table, and my parents, Richard and Eleanor Morgan, looking coolly professional in matching charcoal suits, seated opposite. The board. No Melissa in sight. My father looked older somehow, lines etched more deeply around his eyes. My mother's posture was rigid, her hands clasped tightly on the polished wood surface. They barely acknowledged my entrance with a slight nod. Walter called the meeting to order. "Richard and Eleanor have requested this gathering to discuss the future of their ownership stake in Morgan Pines. Richard, would you like to begin?" My father cleared his throat, straightening the papers in front of him. "After careful consideration and in light of recent disagreements about the resort's direction, Eleanor and I have decided it may be best for all parties if we divest our majority ownership in Morgan Pines." Despite Janet's warning, hearing the words spoken aloud sent a chill through me. "We've received a generous offer from Horizon Hospitality Group," he continued, his voice businesslike as if discussing the sale of a vacation home, not our family legacy. "They're prepared to maintain current operations for a minimum transitional period of 1 year, after which they'll implement their standard resort model." Eleanor spoke next, her voice frosty. "We've provided copies of their initial offer for the board's review. While we maintain controlling interest, We recognize the board's advisory capacity in this matter and welcome your input before proceeding to final negotiations. Copies of the Horizon proposal slid across the table. Board members opened the folders with expressions ranging from concern to outright alarm. The terms were exactly what I'd feared. Aggressive cost-cutting targets, standardized branding, elimination of underperforming assets like our conservation programs and local artisan partnerships. Walter looked up from the document, his face grave. This would fundamentally alter the character of Morgan Pines. Markets evolve, my mother replied smoothly. Thomas's vision served its purpose for its time, but hospitality is changing. Horizon offers the resources to compete in today's environment. At the cost of everything that makes this place special, I said, speaking for the first time. All eyes turned to me. My father's expression hardened. You forfeited your right to make these judgments when you turned this family against itself. I protected what Grandpa built, I replied evenly. What you and Melissa were systematically dismantling. That's your perspective, Eleanor cut in. Regardless, the decision is made. We're prepared to move forward with Horizon unless the board can propose a viable alternative within 30 days. The room fell silent. They had staged this perfectly, dropped a bombshell with a nearly impossible timeline for response. Even with the resort's strong financial performance, assembling funding to buy out my parents' shares would take months, not days. This was their final revenge. If they couldn't control Morgan Pines, they would ensure I lost it too. I took a deep breath and opened my briefcase, removing the second folder. I have an alternative to propose, I said quietly, one that can be implemented immediately. Curious glances exchanged around the table. My parents wore identical expressions of skeptical impatience. Morgan Pines doesn't need Horizon's corporate structure to thrive, I began, laying out architectural renderings on the table. What it needs is to remain true to Grandpa's vision while evolving thoughtfully for modern guests. The renderings showed Silver Pines Manor, the historic Victorian mansion transformed into an exclusive retreat center, a natural extension of the resort's existing hospitality offerings. This property, I continued, sitting on 20 acres of lakefront land adjacent to our existing trails, would allow us to expand our guest experiences, create a premier wedding and event venue, and establish the region's finest wellness retreat, all while maintaining our independent character and commitment to this community. My father frowned, leaning forward to examine the renderings. Silver Pines? That's not. Recognition dawned on his face. The Cavendish estate? That's been off the market for decades. Until recently, I confirmed, sliding the deed across the table. When it became available during my illness. Eleanor picked up the deed, her eyes widening as she read the owner's name. This is registered to you personally. How could you possibly afford Grandpa's private inheritance to me? I explained. The funds he left me outside the business, plus liquidating my investments when I thought I might not have much time left. My father's face had gone pale. You bought Silver Pines Manor without telling us? Yes, I said simply. The dream home you've tried to acquire for 30 years. The property you told me stories about since I was a child. The house you said would be your ultimate achievement. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she set the deed down. Why are you showing us this now? To gloat? I shook my head, removing the final document from my folder and sliding it across the table. I'm offering a trade. My parents stared at the document, a straightforward property exchange agreement. Silver Pines Manor, free and clear, in exchange for your majority shares in Morgan Pines Resort. The room went completely silent. Board members exchanged shocked glances. This is absurd, my father finally managed. The manor is worth approximately the same as your ownership stake, Janet interjected, having clearly been briefed by me beforehand. We've had both independently appraised. The values align remarkably well. Walter leaned forward. If I understand correctly, you're offering to trade a valuable personal asset for your parents' business shares, allowing them to realize their dream of owning Silver Pines while securing the resort's future? Exactly, I confirmed. My parents get the property they've always wanted. The resort remains independent. The board continues its oversight. Our staff keeps their jobs. Our guests receive the same exceptional experiences. Everyone wins. Except you, Eleanor said, studying me with newfound intensity. You'd be giving up a prime piece of real estate. I met her gaze. I'd be securing what matters most to me, Grandpa's legacy. My father opened his mouth, closed it again, then turned to confer quietly with my mother. The whispered conversation lasted several minutes, their expressions changing from disbelief to calculation to something approaching admiration. Finally, Richard turned back to the table. We'd need certain assurances about the property's condition, certain legal protections. All standard in the exchange agreement, I confirmed. Alex Winters prepared the paperwork. You remember him? He's a real estate attorney now. Your childhood friend, Eleanor mused. He helped you buy it secretly. I nodded. The manor needs some renovation, but the structure is sound. Historic designation is already in place. You could be moved in before winter. Another private conference between my parents. The board waited patiently, trying to mask their excitement at this unexpected resolution. We'll need time to consider, my father finally announced. This is unexpected. Of course, Walter agreed. But I'd remind everyone that Horizon is expecting an answer within the month. If this alternative is viable, we should move quickly. As the meeting adjourned, my parents gathered their papers without making eye contact with me. But as they reached the door, my mother paused, turning slightly. You'd really give up Silver Pines after keeping it secret all this time? I met her eyes steadily. Some things are worth more than property. She held my gaze a moment longer, something shifting in her expression, then followed my father out. Walter approached as the room emptied. That was quite a power move. I exhaled slowly, the tension of the confrontation finally releasing. It was the only card left to play. Do you think they'll accept? I gathered my documents, considering the question. They've wanted that house for as long as I can remember. It represents everything they aspire to: social standing, historical significance, exclusivity. The resort was Grandpa's dream, not theirs. I closed my briefcase. Yes, I think they'll accept. He nodded thoughtfully. And if they don't? But then I still have the house, and we find another way to save the resort. I smiled slightly. But they'll accept. You don't spend 30 years coveting something and then walk away when it's finally within reach. The next 3 days passed. In a strange limbo, resort operations continued. Guests checked in and out. Activities were scheduled and executed flawlessly. But beneath the surface, everyone waited. I spent my evenings alone in my grandfather's cabin, alternating between certainty that I'd made the right move and anxiety that I'd misjudged my parents yet again. What if their desire to punish me outweighed their desire for Silver Pines? What if they accepted Horizon's offer out of pure spite? On the morning of the 4th day, Janet appeared in my office doorway, waving an envelope. They've responded, she said, placing it on my desk. The envelope contained a single page, the exchange agreement I'd proposed, signed by both Richard and Eleanor Morgan, with one modification circled in red. Property exchange to include one additional term, Olivia Morgan to retain the position of Chief Executive Officer of Morgan Pines Resort with the continued oversight of the existing board structure. I read the line 3 times, not quite believing what I was seeing. They weren't just accepting the exchange, they were explicitly acknowledging my leadership role. "They've scheduled the formal exchange for tomorrow morning," Janet added. "Both sets of lawyers will be present. The board has been notified." I sat back in my chair, a complex wave of emotions washing over me. Relief that the resort was secured, sadness at giving up the beautiful property, and confusion about my parents' added stipulation. "I don't understand," I admitted. "Why insist I remain CEO? They've fought against my leadership at every turn." Janet shrugged. "Maybe they've finally realized you're the right person for the job. Or maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe what?" "Maybe this is their way of acknowledging they were wrong without having to say the words." The exchange proceeded with business-like efficiency the following morning. Documents signed, notarized, filed. Handshakes exchanged with professional courtesy. The lawyers handled most of the interaction, allowing my parents and me to maintain our careful distance. It wasn't until the formal proceedings concluded that my father approached me in the hallway outside the boardroom. "The keys," he said, holding out a small envelope containing the access codes and security information for Silver Pines Manor. "Everything's there." I accepted it with a nod. "You'll find my grandfather's original blueprints for the property in the library. He always admired that house, too." Something flickered in my father's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. I didn't know that. "There's a lot we never talked about," I said quietly. He seemed about to respond when my mother appeared beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a signal I recognized from childhood, her way of steering conversations. "The renovations," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Will you be staying on as a consultant?" "You've already done significant planning." It was an olive branch, however small, an acknowledgement that I had invested in the property, that my vision for it might have value. "If you'd like," I offered. "The historical elements deserve preservation." Eleanor nodded once, a gesture containing decades of unspoken complexity. "We'll be in touch then." They turned to leave, but my father paused, looking back. "The board meeting next week, the formal CEO appointment, will be there." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something, an acknowledgement that whatever came next would be different from what came before. I watched them walk away, these complex, flawed people who had given me life and then tried to take away my future. The hurt they'd caused wouldn't disappear with a property exchange. The trust they'd broken couldn't be restored with a signature on a document. But as I returned to my office, I felt a weight lifting, not completely, but enough to stand straighter, breathe deeper. The resort was secure. My grandfather's legacy would continue. My own vision could now take root and grow. On my desk, Walter had left a small wooden box I recognized from my grandfather's office. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thomas asked me to give you this when you were ready. I think today qualifies." Beneath the note lay my grandfather's old compass, the one he'd used when first exploring these mountains, deciding where to build his dream. The brass was worn smooth from decades of handling, the needle still pointing faithfully north. Attached was a yellowed piece of paper, my grandfather's handwriting unmistakable. "For Olivia, when she finds her true direction. Some will try to steer you off course. Some paths look easier than they are. But if you keep your eyes on what matters most, you'll never truly be lost. The resort isn't just land and buildings. It's a promise to honor something larger than ourselves. Lead it with integrity, vision, and the courage to do what's right, especially when it's difficult. I've always known you would." I held the compass tightly, its weight solid and reassuring in my palm. Outside my window, the summer sun illuminated the mountains and pines, the lake shimmering in the distance. Guests moved along walking paths, staff attended to their duties. The resort hummed with the ordinary magic of a place where people came to connect with nature and each other. This was what I had fought for. Not just a business, not just a title, but the chance to continue something meaningful, something that had been entrusted to me not because of my name, but because I understood its true value. I placed the compass on my desk where I could see it daily, a reminder that even the most difficult journeys become clearer when you know which direction matters most. 1 year had passed since the property exchange that changed everything. Morgan, Pines had completed a full cycle. Winter ski season, spring renewal, summer adventure programs, and now the vibrant colors of autumn painting the mountainsides in gold and crimson. Nature's rhythm had continued, indifferent to human dramas but quietly healing in its constancy. I stood at the edge of the East Hiking Trail on a crisp October morning, watching the sunrise illuminate the mountains, the same view my grandfather had loved best. The air held that particular mountain scent, pine and earth and the promise of snow in the not-too-distant future. "The quarterly numbers are excellent," Janet said, approaching with tablet in hand. "Bookings are up 28% from last year. Guest satisfaction scores at record highs. The new wellness center is already breaking even, months ahead of projections." I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Grandpa always said this place would thrive if we just stayed true to what makes it special. He was right, Janet agreed, looking out over the property. It had been, in many ways, the most challenging and rewarding year of my professional life. The board had unanimously confirmed me as CEO. The staff had rallied around new leadership with enthusiasm and commitment. The resort's reputation had not just recovered but soared, with national travel publications featuring our sustainability initiatives and authentic mountain experiences. But the greatest transformation had been more personal. My mother had called me 3 months after the exchange, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant on the phone. "The historical documentation you compiled for Silver Pines," she said. "It's quite impressive. We'd like your input on some of the restoration decisions." That first meeting at the manor had been awkward, conversation limited to crown moldings and period-appropriate fixtures. But it had led to another, then another. Gradually, discussions expanded beyond renovation details to resort operations, then tentatively to family memories, shared experiences from before the fracture. Not healing, exactly, but a careful reconstruction, building something new from the broken pieces of what came before. My father had been slower to thaw, his pride more deeply wounded. But even he had eventually extended a gesture of reconciliation, inviting me to view the completed renovations at Silver Pines 6 months after the exchange. "You had good instincts about the property," he'd admitted reluctantly as we stood in view, the restored grand entrance hall. It would have been a shame to modernize these features. From him, this was monumental, an acknowledgement that my vision had value, that I might actually know what I was doing. Melissa remained in California, our relationship still distant and strained, but even there, tiny shoots of possibility had emerged. A brief email on my birthday, a cautious question about possibly visiting for the holidays. Seeds that might, with careful tending, eventually grow into something healthier than what came before. "The board meeting is at 2, Janet reminded me gently. "Walter wants to discuss the expansion proposal." The expansion. After careful consideration, we'd developed a plan to purchase an adjacent property, 30 acres of pristine forest land. Not for development, but for preservation, creating protected habitats and educational nature trails that would enhance our guests' connection to the mountain ecosystem. "I'll be there," I promised, taking one last look at the mountains before turning back toward the main lodge. As I walked along the pine needle-covered path, greeting staff members by name, I felt a sense of rightness that had been missing for so long. This was where I belonged. This was what I had fought for. Not just a title or position, but the chance to continue something meaningful. The board meeting that afternoon was unlike any I could have imagined 2 years earlier. Gone were the tension and hostility replaced by collaborative energy and shared purpose. Walter, now officially board chairman, guided the discussion with wisdom born from decades in the hospitality industry. "The conservation expansion makes sense," Elizabeth Chen said, reviewing the financial projections. "It's ambitious, but sound. The educational focus aligns perfectly with our brand identity." The other board members nodded in agreement. Even my father, who had eventually returned to a non-executive board role, offered quiet support. "Thomas would have approved," Walter said when the unanimous vote was complete. "He always said the right land was worth protecting, worth fighting for." As the meeting concluded, board members filtered out, conversations continuing about upcoming seasonal preparations and next year's marketing initiatives. My father lingered awkwardly, straightening his papers. "The guest feedback this quarter," he said finally, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's exceptional." From him, this simple acknowledgement felt significant. "Thank you," I replied. "We had a good team." He nodded, hesitating as if wanting to say more, then simply gathered his things and left. Some conversations, I'd learned, happened in small increments over long periods of time. Some acknowledgments came indirectly, in the spaces between words. That evening, I hosted a staff appreciation dinner in the main lodge. Not the glossy, Instagram-ready event Melissa had envisioned, but a warm, authentic gathering that honored the people who made Morgan Pines what it was. Long tables, filled with resort employees, from senior managers to housekeeping staff to groundskeepers and their families. Platters of locally sourced food circulated alongside glasses of regional wine. Children played between the tables while their parents relaxed after the busy summer season. I stood to offer a toast, looking out at the gathering. These people, who had stood by the resort through its darkest days, who had trusted me to lead even when my own family hadn't. "To Morgan Pines," I said, raising my glass. "To the mountains that shelter us, to the legacy we continue together." "To Olivia," Walter called from his seat, raising his glass higher, "who fought for what matters." The room echoed with agreement, glasses raising, faces warm with genuine affection and respect. In that moment, I understood something my grandfather had tried to tell me years before. That true legacy isn't what's handed to you, but what you build and protect through your own efforts. That some battles, however painful, are worth fighting. That the most valuable inheritances aren't things, but values. The courage to stand up for what's right. The wisdom to know what's worth preserving. The strength to protect what matters most. Later, after the dinner had ended, and the last guests departed, I walked alone to my grandfather's cabin, my home now in every sense. The full moon illuminated the mountains, casting silver light across the pine forests. I thought about the journey of the past 2 years, the betrayal, the fight, the rebuilding. I thought about what had been lost and what had been gained. My parents had tried to give what was rightfully mine to my sister, treating my inheritance like a birthday gift they could reassign at will. In doing so, they had revealed truths about themselves, about our family, about what really mattered to each of us. Their decision had shocked me, hurt me, nearly broken me. But it had also forced me to stand up, to fight back, to become the person my grandfather had always believed I could be. And for that, strangely enough, I was grateful. 2 years to the day after that fateful welcome home party, I stood at my grandfather's grave in the small cemetery on the eastern edge of the resort property. I'd brought a bottle of his favorite whiskey, placing it beside the simple granite headstone that read, "Thomas James Morgan. He honored the mountains and those who came to love them." The autumn air was still, the resort spread out below in a tapestry of gold and crimson, the summer's work complete, preparations for winter beginning. I sat on the small stone bench beside the grave, uncorked the whiskey and poured 2 glasses. One for me, one for him. "I think we did it, Grandpa," I said quietly. "The resort is secure. The guest experiences are better than ever. The conservation expansion is underway." A gentle breeze rustled the nearby aspen trees, sending a shower of golden leaves spiraling down around me. I took a sip of the whiskey, letting the warm flavor remind me of everything that had led to this moment. So much had changed in 2 years. The resort had not only recovered but reached new heights. The board was united in its vision. The staff was engaged and proud of what we were creating together. Even my relationship with my parents had found a fragile new equilibrium. Not the easy closeness we'd never really had, but a cautious respect that might, with time, grow into something more substantial. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Janet, reminding me about the meeting with our new sustainable tourism consultant. Life continued. Work continued. Growth continued. Before leaving, I took a small envelope from my jacket and placed it beside the whiskey bottle. Inside was a photograph. The entire Morgan Pines staff gathered on the main lodge steps, smiling broadly, a banner above them reading, "Colorado's Best Workplace 2023. The award we'd received last month, recognizing not just our guest experiences, but how we treated our employees, our community, our environment. The recognition that would have made my grandfather proudest of all. As I walked back toward the main buildings, I reflected on everything the past 2 years had taught me. About family, about business, about myself, about the difference between what is given to you and what you earn through your own efforts. For so long I had waited for my inheritance, the position, the authority, the resort itself, as something that would be bestowed upon me. I had shaped my life around a promise, working diligently, but always with the expectation that what was meant for me would eventually come my way through the natural order of things. The betrayal had shattered that expectation. It had forced me to fight not just for what was promised, but for what I believed in. It had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed: resilience, strategic thinking, the courage to stand alone when necessary. Most importantly, it had transformed my relationship with the resort itself. What had once been my grandfather's legacy to me had become my own creation, shaped by my decisions, my vision, my unwavering commitment through the darkest days. In the strangest way, my parents' attempt to take everything from me had given me something far more valuable: the knowledge that I was capable of building something on my own terms, that I didn't need their approval or permission to honor what mattered most. When I reached the main lodge, a tour group was just arriving. Outdoor enthusiasts from across the country who had reserved their spots months in advance. They fell silent as I approached, several of them recognizing me from recent travel features. "Welcome to Morgan Pines," I said warmly. "I'm Olivia Morgan." "We've read so much about you and what you've accomplished here," one woman said. "About how you saved your grandfather's legacy." I smiled, thinking about how incomplete that narrative really was. "The truth is a bit more complicated," I replied. "The resort saved me as much as I saved it." After greeting the visitors, I continued to my office to prepare for the afternoon meetings. On my desk sat a small wooden box I'd discovered in my grandfather's things after his death, but had only recently opened. Inside were his handwritten journals, decades of observations about the land, the resort, the guests, and tucked between the pages, letters he had written to me but never sent, sharing wisdom he hoped I would someday need. One passage had become something of a mantra for me in recent months. "Olivia, remember that the finest views come after the steepest climbs. When the path seems impossible, when doubt clouds your vision, those are the moments that prepare you for heights you couldn't otherwise reach. The same is true of people. Don't fear the difficult seasons. They are preparing you for your best summit." My parents had given my inheritance, my birthright, to my sister, treating it like a casual birthday gift they could reassign at will. In doing so, they had forced me into the climb my grandfather wrote about. the difficult season that would ultimately define me. Life doesn't always give you what you deserve. Sometimes it takes away what should rightfully be yours. The measure of a person isn't found in what they're given, but in what they do when something precious is taken away. In my case, losing my inheritance had ultimately led me to claim something far more valuable: my own power, my own vision, my own unshakable sense of purpose. And for that unexpected gift, I would always be grateful. The morning of the exchange, agreement dawned with a crystalline clarity that only seems to exist in the Colorado mountains. I stood on the porch of my grandfather's cabin, watching the sun slowly illuminate the peaks, casting long shadows across the valley. Today would change everything, not just for me, but for the resort, for my family, for everyone whose lives were intertwined with Morgan Pines. I dressed carefully, choosing a forest green dress that my grandfather had always liked, paired with his old silver pine cone pendant, a gift from the resort staff on the 20th anniversary of Morgan Pines. The weight of it against my collarbone felt grounding, a physical reminder of what I was fighting for. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "Documents ready. Legal team in place. Board assembled. Ready when you are." With one last look at the mountains, I headed toward the main lodge. Each step felt both heavy with consequence and buoyant with possibility. The path was lined with towering pines that had stood witness to 3 generations of my family, their needles cushioning my footsteps as I walked toward what might be the most pivotal moment of my life. The exchange was set to take place in the resort's cedar-paneled library, a quiet, dignified space my grandfather had designed for guests to read and reflect, its walls lined with books on mountain ecology, local history, and wilderness appreciation. Now it would serve as the setting for a different kind of legacy transition. As I approached the main lodge, I saw Alex waiting at the entrance, his familiar face a welcome sight amidst the tension of the morning. We'd been friends since childhood, climbing the same trees, fishing the same streams, sharing the dreams and disappointments that shaped our lives. Now he stood as both my real estate attorney and one of the few people who truly understood what today meant. "All set?" he asked, his voice low as he fell into step beside me. "As I'll ever be," I replied, my hand instinctively reaching for the pendant at my neck. Alex nodded toward it. "He'd be proud, you know. Thomas always said you were the one who truly understood what this place was about." The words warmed something in me that had been cold for too long. "I hope so." "Are you sure about this?" Alex asked, concern evident in his eyes. "Silver Pines is extraordinary. Once it's gone..." "I'm sure," I interrupted gently. "Some things matter more than property, no matter how beautiful." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure this exchange is ironclad. No loopholes, no misunderstandings, no room for anyone to change the terms later." The library was already filled when we entered. The board members seated in leather armchairs, Walter at the head of the arrangement, Janet standing by the fireplace, documents spread on the large oak table. My parents' legal team, 3 stern-faced attorneys in immaculate suits, positioned like sentinels on one side of the room. And then my parents themselves, Richard and Eleanor Morgan, standing near the windows, their postures rigid, expressions carefully neutral. No Melissa in sight, apparently still in California, distancing herself from the aftermath of her failed coup. "Olivia!" Walter greeted me warmly, stepping forward to shake my hand. "Alex, thank you both for being prompt." My father nodded stiffly in acknowledgement. My mother's eyes flickered briefly to the pine cone pendant but showed no reaction. "Shall we begin?" Walter suggested, gesturing to the table where the documents waited. The next hour unfolded with the precise choreography of a well-rehearsed legal proceeding. Documents presented, reviewed, explained. Terms clarified, conditions verified, signatures witnessed and notarized. The exchange of Morgan Pines shares for Silver Pines Manor laid out in careful legal language that transformed family betrayal into a business transaction. I signed where indicated, my handwriting steady despite the enormity of what each signature represented. My parents did the same, their pens moving across the paper with practiced efficiency. Through it all, the tension in the room remained palpable, like electricity before a storm, charged but contained. No raised voices, no accusations, no recriminations, just the quiet shuffle of papers and the occasional murmur of legal consultation. When the final signature was in place, Walter stood. With these documents duly executed and witnessed, the exchange is complete. Olivia Morgan now holds majority interest in Morgan Pines Resort and Spa. Richard and Eleanor Morgan now possess full ownership of Silver Pines Manor. He paused, looking around the room. Are there any final statements either party wishes to make for the record? My father cleared his throat. The transfer of Silver Pines includes all historical documentation, architectural plans, and property records, as specified in Section 4 of the agreement. His voice was businesslike, as if discussing any ordinary property transaction. And the transfer of Morgan Pines shares includes the stipulation that Olivia Morgan will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer. As agreed, Walter confirmed, looking toward my parents. My mother nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. That is correct. In that moment, the reality of what had just occurred washed over me. I had done it. Morgan Pines was secure. My grandfather's legacy would continue under my stewardship. The price had been high. Silver Pines Manor, a property of extraordinary beauty and historical significance. But the exchange felt right, necessary, inevitable. As the attorneys began gathering their materials, my father approached, extending his hand formally. The keys to Silver Pines are with our attorney. All security codes and access information are included. I shook his hand briefly, the contact impersonal despite our shared blood. Thank you. All property documentation is ready for transfer as well. He hesitated, something unspoken hovering in the air between us. For a moment, I thought he might actually say something meaningful, an acknowledgement of what had been lost between us, perhaps even an apology. Instead, he simply nodded and turned away, moving to join my mother, who was already heading toward the door, her shoulders straight, her stride purposeful. Walter approached as they left, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. It's done, Olivia. Morgan Pines is yours now, officially and completely. Not mine, I corrected softly. Ours. The resort belongs to everyone who loves it. The staff, the guests, the community. I'm just its caretaker, like Grandpa was. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. And that right there is why Thomas knew you were the right choice all along. The room gradually emptied, attorneys with their briefcases, board members with their congratulations, Janet with her quiet assurance that the financial transition was already underway. Eventually, only Alex remained, watching me as I stood by the window, looking out at the mountains that had shaped 3 generations of my family. So, he said, coming to stand beside me, CEO of Morgan Pines, how does it feel? I considered the question, searching for the right words to describe the complex tangle of emotions coursing through me. Bittersweet, I finally answered. Necessary. Right. He nodded in understanding. And Silver Pines? I turned to face him fully. I need you to do something for me. Anything, he replied without hesitation. Monitor the renovations. Make sure they respect the historical integrity of the property. My parents will want to modernize everything, but there are elements that should be preserved. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. And I'd like you to create a conservation easement for the surrounding woodland. 20 acres of protected forest that can never be developed, regardless of who owns the manor in the future. Alex's eyebrows rose slightly. You're still protecting the property, even after giving it up? I'm protecting what matters most. About it, I clarified. The land itself, the ecosystem, the connection to this valley. The house is just a structure. Beautiful, historic, significant, but ultimately just wood and stone. The forest around it is irreplaceable. He studied me for a long moment, then smiled slowly. Thomas Morgan's granddaughter, through and through. I returned the smile, feeling some of the weight lift from my shoulders. I'll take that as the highest compliment. As it was intended, he assured me. Now, CEO Morgan, what's your first official act? I took a deep breath, my hand once again finding the pinecone pendant. A staff meeting, everyone, from senior management to seasonal workers. It's time they heard directly from me about what happens next. The main dining hall of Morgan Pines had never been so packed outside of peak holiday season. Staff members filled every available chair, stood along the walls, gathered in the doorways. Everyone from housekeeping to management, groundskeepers to activity directors, all eyes focused on the simple wooden podium where I now stood. News of the exchange had spread quickly through the resort grapevine, but details were scarce, rumors abundant. The tension in the room was palpable, a mixture of apprehension, curiosity, and cautious hope. I scanned the faces before me, people I'd worked alongside for years, many of whom had known me since childhood. They deserved honesty. They deserved certainty after months of turmoil. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. As you've likely heard, there have been significant changes in the ownership structure of Morgan Pines. I want to address those changes directly and clearly with all of you. I paused, taking in the sea of attentive faces. As of this morning, I have assumed majority ownership of Morgan Pines Resort and Spa. The board has unanimously appointed me as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. A murmur rippled through the crowd, relief from some, surprise from others. This transition comes after a challenging period for our resort family, I continued. The details of that challenge aren't important now. What matters is what comes next. I stepped out from behind the podium, wanting nothing between me and the people who made Morgan Pines possible. My grandfather built this resort with a simple vision: to create a place where people could connect with these mountains, with nature, with each other in meaningful ways. That vision has guided Morgan Pines for 50 years. It will continue to guide us forward. I met the eyes of Ben Wallace, our environmental director, who had been uncertain which side to take during the conflict. He nodded almost imperceptibly, a small gesture of renewed confidence. I make 3 promises to you today, I continued. First, Morgan Pines will remain independent. We will not be absorbed into a corporate chain or standardized hospitality model. Relief visibly washed over many faces. The fear of a corporate takeover had been real and pressing. Second, our commitment to sustainable tourism, environmental stewardship, and authentic guest experiences remains unwavering. We will continue to be leaders in responsible mountain hospitality. I saw Elena from housekeeping nodding vigorously, pride evident in her expression. She had been with us for nearly 30 years and had helped implement many of our green initiatives. Third, I said, my voice softening slightly. Every person in this room is essential to what makes Morgan Pines special. Your job security, your working conditions, your ability to contribute meaningfully to our shared mission. These are my priorities as CEO. The tension in the room began to dissolve, replaced by something warmer, more hopeful. There will be changes, I acknowledged. Growth requires adaptation, but these changes will be thoughtful, transparent, and true to who we are. I welcome your ideas, your concerns, your perspectives as we move forward together. I stepped back, hands resting lightly on the podium. My door is open. My commitment is absolute. Morgan Pines isn't just a business to me. It's a legacy of care, of respect for these mountains, of hospitality in its truest sense. I'm honored to continue that legacy with all of you. As I finished speaking, the room remained silent for a moment. Then, from the back, a single person began to applaud. Others joined, the sound swelling until it filled the hall. Not just polite acknowledgement, but genuine support, relief, perhaps even celebration. Miguel, our head chef for 20 years, stood up. "To Olivia Morgan," he called out, his voice carrying above the applause, "who fought for all of us." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Cheers, more applause, even a few whistles. The sound washed over me like a wave, unexpected and deeply moving. When the noise finally subsided, staff members began approaching, some with questions about specific operations, others simply to offer congratulations or express relief. I spoke with as many as I could, listening to concerns, acknowledging uncertainties, providing what reassurance I could. Janet appeared at my side as the crowd finally began to disperse. "That went well," she observed. "They needed to hear directly from you." I nodded, watching as staff members returned to their duties, the atmosphere noticeably lighter throughout the lodge. They deserved that much after everything. "So," Janet said, checking her tablet, "your schedule as CEO is already filling up. The management team wants a strategic planning session. Marketing needs approval on the fall campaign. The banker is requesting a meeting about refinancing options now that ownership is stable." I smiled at her efficiency. "And it begins." "Actually," she corrected, returning the smile, "it began months ago when you decided to fight. This is just making it official." The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Meetings, decisions, planning sessions, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities as I settled into my role as CEO. The resort operations, despite the recent turmoil, remained fundamentally sound, a testament to the solid foundation my grandfather had built and the dedicated staff who had maintained it through difficult times. I instituted weekly all-staff communications, monthly open forums where any employee could bring questions or concerns directly to management, and a suggestion system that rewarded innovative ideas for improving guest experiences or operational efficiency. The message was clear. Morgan Pines would be transparent, collaborative, and forward-thinking under my leadership. The transition wasn't without its challenges. Some long-standing vendors, uncertain about the resort's stability after the ownership, needed reassurance. A few key staff members who had allied themselves closely with Melissa chose to leave. The local business community, which had heard rumors but few facts about the family conflict, required careful relationship rebuilding. Through it all, I maintained the outward calm and steady purpose that had gotten me through the worst of the crisis. But privately, the emotional toll of the past months, the betrayal, the fight, the necessary sacrifice of Silver Pines, began to surface in quiet moments. It was during one such moment, nearly a month after the exchange, that Walter found me in my grandfather's office, now my office, staring at the old photographs on the wall. Images of Morgan Pines in its early days, my grandfather standing proudly before the original lodge, the mountains unchanging behind him. "Working late?" Walter asked, knocking lightly on the open door. I turned, offering a tired smile. "Just thinking." He entered, settling into one of the leather chairs across from the desk. "About?" I gestured to the photographs. "About what Grandpa would think of all this. The fighting, the deception, the legal maneuvers. It seems so far from what he built here." Walter was quiet for a moment, his gaze following mine to the images on the wall. Thomas wasn't naive, Olivia. He understood people, family dynamics, the complexities of passing down something valuable. He knew there would be challenges. But this level of betrayal? I shook my head. My own parents attempting to push me out completely? Melissa misappropriating funds? Forged signatures? Perhaps not the specifics, Walter acknowledged, but the fundamental conflict? Yes, I believe he anticipated something like this. I turned to face him fully. What do you mean? Walter sighed, leaning forward slightly. Your parents never truly connected with the vision of Morgan Pines. They saw it as an asset, a business opportunity, a status symbol, never as the calling Thomas understood it to be. He knew that difference in perspective would eventually create tension. Then why leave the resort vulnerable to them at all? I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. Why not structure the succession more definitively? The legal complications were real, Walter explained. But more than that, Thomas believed in you, Olivia. He believed you would be strong enough to fight for what mattered when the time came. I absorbed this in silence, trying to reconcile. The grandfather I'd loved with a man who would deliberately leave such a difficult battle for me to fight. He left you something, Walter said after a moment, reaching into his jacket pocket. I was waiting for the right moment to give it to you. He extended an envelope, yellowed with age, my name written on the front in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. When did he give you this? I asked, taking it carefully. About a month before he died. He made me promise not to give it to you until after the storm, as he put it. Walter stood, moving toward the door. I think that time has come. After he left, I stared at the envelope for a long while, tracing my fingers over the familiar handwriting. Finally, I opened it, unfolding a single sheet of paper covered in my grandfather's writing. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then the conflict I feared has come to pass, and you've weathered it. I'm sorry for the pain this has surely caused you, but I'm not sorry for believing in your strength. Your parents and I never shared the same vision for Morgan Pines. Where I saw a sacred trust, a responsibility to these mountains and the people who come to experience them, they saw a business asset to be maximized. I knew this fundamental difference would eventually create problems for you. I could have created legal structures to force their compliance with my wishes, but such measures rarely succeed in the long run. What matters most cannot be secured through legal documents alone. It must be protected by people who truly understand its value. You understand, Olivia. You always have. From the time you were small, hiking these trails with me, learning the names of every plant and animal, caring for our guests with genuine warmth, you've shown me that you grasp what makes Morgan Pines special. The battle you fought was inevitable. Painful, yes. Unfair, certainly. But necessary. Because in fighting for Morgan Pines, you've had to define what it truly means to you, to articulate why it matters, to demonstrate your commitment through action rather than mere inheritance. Whatever sacrifice you've made to secure the resort's future, know that I am proud of you. Not just for winning the fight, but for understanding what was worth fighting for in the first place. Morgan Pines isn't just land and buildings, it's a promise to honor something larger than ourselves. Lead it with the integrity and vision you've already shown, and it will thrive for generations to come. With love and absolute faith in you, Grandpa Thomas. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring my vision by the third reading. Here, at last, was confirmation that my grandfather had foreseen the conflict, had even, in his way, prepared me for it. Not by making it easier, but by believing I was strong enough to endure it. The mixture of emotions was overwhelming. Grief. For the grandfather I still missed desperately. Anger at being left to fight such a difficult battle. Validation that he had trusted me so completely, and a renewed sense of purpose moving forward. I carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope, placing it in my desk drawer. Then I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and turned back to the operational plans I'd been reviewing before Walter's visit. There was work to be done, a resort to run, a legacy to honor through action rather than sentiment. The following Saturday, I drove to Silver Pines Manor for the first time since the exchange. Alex had arranged the visit, coordinating with my parents who were overseeing the initial phase of renovations but would be away for the weekend. As I pulled up the winding driveway, the historic Victorian mansion came into view. Its elegant turrets and wraparound porch just as impressive as when I'd first visited it months ago during my illness. The property occupied 20 acres of prime lakefront land, with magnificent old-growth forest surrounding the main house on 3 sides. Alex was waiting on the porch, architectural plans tucked under his arm. "They're already making changes," he said as I approached, but focusing primarily on the interior modernization, updating plumbing, electrical, that sort of thing. "And the conservation easement?" I asked, following him inside. "In process," he confirmed. They weren't thrilled about it, but the language in the exchange agreement was clear. 20 acres of protected woodland in perpetuity. I nodded, relieved that at least the natural beauty of the property would be preserved, regardless of what happened to the house itself. The interior of Silver Pines was even more impressive than I remembered. Soaring ceilings, intricate woodwork, massive stone fireplaces, and walls of windows capturing the spectacular lake and mountain views. Despite being emptied of furniture, in preparation for renovation, the house retained its grandeur and sense of history. "They're keeping most of the original architectural details," Alex explained as we walked through the grand entrance hall. "Your father actually pushed back against some of the more aggressive modernization plans the architect proposed." This surprised me. My father had always favored contemporary design, efficiency over aesthetics, function over historical preservation. "Really?" Alex nodded. He specifically mentioned wanting to honor the historical significance of the property, said something about respecting what came before. I absorbed this quietly as we continued our tour, perhaps seeing my willingness to sacrifice Silver Pines for Morgan Pines had shifted something in my father's perspective. A small recognition of what it means to value something beyond its monetary worth. We reached the library, a magnificent room with built-in bookshelves lining every wall and a massive bay window overlooking the lake. It was empty now, but I could imagine it filled with books, comfortable chairs, perhaps a chess set by the window, a room designed for contemplation and connection. "This was your grandfather's favorite room when he visited the original owner," Alex said, watching me take in the space. "Did you know he used to advise Mr. Cavendish on forestry management for the property?" I turned in surprise. "No, I had no idea," Alex smiled. "They were friends despite the considerable age difference. Your grandfather helped ensure the forest around Silver Pines remained healthy, diverse, properly managed. He loved this place too, in his way." Something shifted in my perspective, a new understanding falling into place. My grandfather had connected with Silver Pines as well as Morgan Pines, had recognized the value of both properties, their complementary roles in preserving what mattered about this valley. I moved to the bay window, looking out at the magnificent view of the lake and mountains beyond. The same mountains visible from Morgan Pines, just from a different vantage point. The same ecosystem, the same responsibility of stewardship, same fundamental values. "He would have approved of the exchange," I said quietly, more to myself than to Alex. "Not because of giving up Silver Pines, but because of what it secured." "I think you're right," Alex agreed, coming to stand beside me at the window. Thomas understood that some sacrifices are worth making when they protect what matters most. We completed our tour in companionable silence, me taking mental notes on elements of the property I wanted to ensure were preserved, Alex occasionally pointing out architectural features of particular significance. As we finished and headed back toward our cars, a new sense of peace had settled over me. Not regret for what I'd given up, but certainty that the exchange had been the right decision. "One more thing," Alex said as we reached the driveway. Your father left something. For you. He handed me a small envelope. He asked me to give it to you if you came to see the property. Inside was a single key. Old, ornate, clearly original to the house, and a brief note in my father's precise handwriting. For the library door, some things should remain accessible to those who truly appreciate them. R.M. I stared at the key, then at the note, trying to decipher the message behind my father's cryptic words. Was this a gesture of reconciliation? An acknowledgement of what I'd sacrificed? A recognition that I had valued Silver Pines for more than just its material worth? Perhaps it was all of these things, or none of them. With my father, clear communication had never been his strength. But the key itself was meaningful, a literal and symbolic access to a space that held significance for both me and my grandfather. I slipped the key into my pocket, its weight small but tangible, a tiny bridge between what had been lost and what might still be rebuilt. "Will you come back?" Alex asked as I opened my car door. I considered the question, looking back at the magnificent house with its turrets silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Yes, I decided, not to reclaim it or regret it, but to remember why it mattered enough to give up. As I drove back to Morgan Pines, the setting sun painted the mountains in gold and shadow, the familiar road winding through pine forests, and alongside rushing streams. This valley had shaped my family for 3 generations, its beauty and wildness influencing who we became, for better or worse. My parents had seen it primarily as a backdrop for wealth and status, first through Morgan Pines, then through their desire for Silver Pines. My sister had viewed it as a setting for her personal ambitions, a stage for the lifestyle she wanted to project. Neither perspective fully honored what made this place truly special, but my grandfather had understood, and now that understanding was my inheritance, more valuable than property deeds or corporate shares, more lasting than buildings or business titles. The knowledge of what matters, what's worth fighting for, what deserves to be preserved not just for ourselves but for everyone who comes after us. As Morgan Pines came into view, its lights twinkling in the gathering dusk, I felt a sense of homecoming that went beyond the physical structures. This was where I belonged, not because it had been given to me, but because I had earned it, fought for it, proven myself worthy of its stewardship. Whatever came next, whatever challenges arose, whatever opportunities presented themselves, would be faced with the clarity that comes from knowing exactly what you value and why. That clarity was my grandfather's true legacy, and I would honor it with every decision I made as CEO of Morgan Pines Resort and Spa. The key to the Silver Pines Library remained in my pocket, a small reminder that sometimes what we give up opens doors we never expected, and that the most important inheritances aren't things at all, but the values that guide us in deciding what truly matters. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when I exchanged Silver Pines Manor for my rightful place at Morgan Pines. The resort had flourished beyond my grandest hopes. Our sustainable tourism model had won international recognition. Guest bookings were at an all-time high. More importantly, the staff felt like family, united in purpose, committed to my grandfather's vision. I stood at the edge of our newest hiking trail, dedicated to Thomas Morgan's memory. The autumn colors painted the mountainside in brilliant gold and crimson, nature's finest artistry on display. "Beautiful view," came a voice behind me. I turned to find my father standing there, looking older but somehow softer than he had years ago. Our relationship had evolved slowly, not to closeness exactly, but to a measured respect. Monthly board meetings had become quarterly dinners. Stilted conversation had given way to cautious honesty. "It is," I agreed. "Grandpa would have loved this trail." He nodded, gazing out at the mountains. "Your mother and I are selling Silver Pines," he said unexpectedly. It never quite felt like home. I absorbed this news silently, remembering the beautiful Victorian mansion I'd sacrificed. "We've had an offer," he continued, "from a conservation group. They want to turn it into an environmental education center." Something warm unfolded in my chest. That's perfect. We thought so too. He hesitated. They want someone with local knowledge to consult on the project. I suggested you. 5 years ago, such an offer would have seemed impossible, manipulative, even. Now, it felt like closure. "I'd like that," I said simply. As we walked back toward the lodge, my father paused. "You know, when you bought Silver Pines during your illness, I was furious. Thought it was spite." "It wasn't," I assured him. "I know that now." He looked directly at me, perhaps truly seeing me for the first time. "You understood what mattered most. It took us losing everything to figure that out." That evening, I sat on my cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fading light. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet, another industry award nomination. Beside it lay my grandfather's compass, its needle still pointing faithfully north. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had given my inheritance to my sister while I was fighting for my life. They hadn't realized I had secretly bought their dream house, but neither had I realized that in losing what I thought was my inheritance, I would gain something far more valuable: the certainty that I wasn't defined by what was given to me, but by what I was willing to fight for. Some inheritances aren't properties or businesses. They're values, courage, vision, the understanding of what truly matters. And those, once earned, can never be taken away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.